2 years ago, my family went on sabbatical to Southeast Asia and Australia. We were in Perth, Australia, and my cousin is also there, and her husband is a marine biologist. And so one day I was getting ready to teach the next day. The folks at the seminary had asked me to teach on eschatology, introduce the topic of eschatology. Eschatology is the study of the last things, or the end times. And this marine biologist, who's a lovely person and pretty thoroughly secular as far as I could tell, is like, so what are you lecturing on, mate? And how do you explain eschatology in a way that doesn't make you sound like you're a total wacko to somebody who doesn't buy the assumptions? And as I was thinking about that experience, I was also thinking back to Singapore, where my family went to the Buddha's Tooth Temple, which is this huge Buddhist temple in town built by some very wealthy donors who wanted to promote Buddhism. And the top floor of this temple was a museum of Buddhism. So you could go, and the beginning of the room took you through a little Buddhist doctrine course. In about 100 yards, you reviewed, first of all, the story of Siddhartha. It's a pretty straightforward story of how Siddhartha attained enlightenment just by thinking clearly, as he experienced a lot of different things in life. And then it got to the future, according to Buddhist doctrine, and it got crazy. Like the returning Buddha, and the whole world turns into, and it's like, and I thought, hey, I recognize this. This is like the Left Behind series for Buddhists. Like every tradition does this. And this got me to think, how do you frame eschatology? And the way I want to frame it, and continue to want to frame it, is by describing human, the quirky underside of human psychology. Shermer readers have gotten a grand tour of this, right? We think in quirky ways. And so I'm just going to refer to that as wackiness. There's just a wacky side to human rationality. And I'm sure dogs are wacky in their own canine ways and all the rest, but I think human beings have a characteristic wackiness that characterizes our thinking. And whether it evolved or not really doesn't matter. It's here, and we have to deal with it. And you see wackiness show up, you see it manifest, especially in places where there's unknowns, where we don't know things. We tend to fill in the gaps. You see wackiness surface and grow where passions are concerned, right? Human desires and longings. Where power is concerned. Now, we have election tomorrow. In both political parties, there are people that have just gone unhinged, right? And, the world is going to end if their candidate gets voted into office. People just can lose perspective where power is concerned. Personal power, political power, social power. Power corrupts, right? Religion is a place where wackiness grows and grows. Any religion, including Christian religion. And including things you don't think of as religion. For instance, a study a couple years ago showed that secular Americans who avow no religious tradition, are more likely to be superstitious than Christians. They're more likely to have whatever the equivalent is of, lucky days or rabbit's feet or whatever. Astrology. It's almost as if either Christian faith dampens our wackiness, or it channels our wackiness in a certain place so that we don't end up as likely to, turn the stars into powers that control our lives. Maybe it's a combination of both. And human wackiness especially grows and grows where the future is concerned. whether or not you believe in God. People extrapolate futures either to utopias or dystopias, either Star Trek or 1984. This is just something that we do. And a number of things don't cure human wackiness. You would think that a course in logic would cure our irrational side. But, philosophy professors are just as strange as they were before. There are people who think in rigorously logical ways and yet reach very odd conclusions because their assumptions might be wacky or might just be a subset of the real thing. Now, I'm not throwing stones. I'm a theology professor, so we'll get to us in a minute. But in fact, intelligent people trained in logic are more likely to think themselves to wrong answers than people who rely on more common sense. So, logic is not a cure for human wackiness. Education isn't. As a quick tour of any university will show you, particularly elite universities. People don't get more and more sane as they grow older. They tend to get odder as they grow older. I see some knowing smiles. Well, adolescence is not exactly a calm sea of rationality either. Spirituality doesn't seem to cure human wackiness. I just told you about a few traditions where people who are religious don't lose their oddness, don't lose their strange ways of thinking. Wealth doesn't cure it. Just look around Montecito, California. Community doesn't cure it. In fact, communities, groups of people tend to take on odd characteristics as groups. All right? Page. You would think diversity would cure it because our oddness might check one another's oddness. That happens, but it doesn't seem to create clear rational thinking. What about holiness? What about salvation? Well, saints are some of the strangest people around. So now this is going to be the setting. This is going to be one of the factors going into how I want to approach eschatology, because this human strangeness is part of us. I think it's fine. Although it can lead us in some very bad places, it's not intrinsically bad. The fact that saints are still odd means that oddness isn't sinful. Some of this just has to do, I think, with being created, with being creatures. We think one thing at a time. There's things we know, things we don't know. We're not perfect at assessing risk. We don't know the future, but we know enough to be able to predict some things about the future. So if you're looking for a cure for wackiness in this, if you're expecting me to say Jesus cures wackiness, I don't think that's true. I don't think there is a cure because I don't think it's a disease. However, it can become diseased. Human wackiness can go wrong